What is the Standdown Framework?
So Standdown Framework, it's an everlasting call to action system. This system, 9 step, every chapter is a letter of stand down, is a deliberate pause in operations. And it will give leaders an opportunity to reset, refocus, and realign so they can move forward with clarity and precision. The letters, we can start with S, signal the need. T, team alignment. A, announce the stand down, name the anchor point, decode the disruption, discuss and innovate, operation reset, work the plan, normalize, execute, and win, to sum it up.
Welcome to the Tech Ed Podcast. I am your host, Matt Kirkner, with a question for our audience, a rhetorical question, of course. What can the U.S. military and special operations teach manufacturers, educators, folks running any organization about things like running a great organization, about leadership, in the case of manufacturing, about improving yield or decreasing downtime or improving quality, improving teamwork among our team members? Well, it turns out quite a bit, and that is going to be the topic of this episode of the Tech Ed Podcast. I don't generally read the biographies of our guests, but in this case, I'm going to read a short biography of the gentleman who is joining us on this episode of the Tech Ed Podcast. It's fascinating and it's impressive. And his name, by the way, is J.C. Richards, and Jay is a retired U.S. Navy senior chief with 17 years in naval special warfare as a special warfare combatant craft crewman, leading elite teams on complex global missions. After 20 years of service, he served as a CIA security contractor in high threat Middle East environments, and then in the J3 International Department of the U.S. Special Operations Command headquarters, leading the global collaboration of special operations efforts among 27 partner nations allied to the United States of America. It's a great pleasure for me to welcome my friend J.C. Richards. Jay, awesome to have you here on the Tech Ed Podcast.
Thank you, Matt. It's a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. We're going to have a great conversation about all of these things that we just teed up in the intro. I got to know you over the course of last year. A long story as to how, but you're just a terrific human being, wonderful person. Our audience is going to really enjoy getting to know you. I teed up a little bit in the book, and I've got it right here, by the way. So check it out. The Standdown Framework is the book that Jay wrote. It's really good. I've read it cover to cover, and in fact, if you kind of look through here, you can see where I have like starred and underlined and put all kind. I mean, so literally, I read every word of your book. I thought it was phenomenal. There's a lot of lessons here I wish I had learned before, and a lot of parallels to some of the things that I've already done in manufacturing. Looking forward to that conversation. But let's start with this. I teed up a little bit your background, which is crazy impressive. But if you were to summarize that a little bit for the audience, what would you tell us about the experience that you had in the U.S. military and as a CIA contractor and so on? What can you tell us? Which probably isn't a ton, but what should we know?
Yeah, we'll hit the wave tops on a few things. So, the inspiration of me joining the military, the U.S. Navy in particular, came from 9/11. Actually, I was 25 years old when that happened. I was currently working at a family-owned business, and so I was privileged enough over the course of about 7 years to work hand in hand with my grandfather and my father. The entire time, I always had this calling to be a firefighter. And I knew in a job fair after a job fair in eighth grade that my life was never more important than anybody else's.
Awesome.
So therefore, I pursued that in the evenings. And of course, my pursuit of leadership actually started then as well. My dad, while I was at the age of 18, made me go to a Dale Carnegie course. It was about an 8-week course. And there I was, 18, maybe 19 years old. And I was in this course with news anchors. It was humbling, but I was very confident during those times of my life.
Yeah.
18, 19, I was on top of the world, right? So, anyways, 9/11 happens, and I was like, you know what? This is my opportunity. It's time to go. I enlisted in the delayed entry program, also known as DEP. I wanted to be a shipboard firefighter.
Okay.
So I left in March for boot camp. I left boot camp, went to San Diego, reported aboard the USS Boxer 24 hours prior to the deployment of Operation Iraqi Freedom.
Wow.
No time to acclimate. And what a shift in culture shock that
I
was.
bet it was. Yeah. Amazing.
A US warship, it was 884 feet long and living in a basically a bedroom with 160 plus people sharing
Amazing.
bathrooms. It was, humbling, to say the least. We're
Yeah.
underway for 106 straight days.
Wow.
Now, I wanna say at about 40 or 45 days, you're eligible for 2 beers. Right, you're eligible for
Yeah.
a 2 beer. However, because of location and our mission, it was shot down,
Hmm.
completely shut down. So,
Wow.
we didn't get our beer day.
Huh.
We just kept steaming forward, and we offloaded the Marines, and we ended up pulling into Jabal Ali for our first port visit. And, it was around that time that I was like, "You know what? I think there's something better out there for me." Something with, It was more challenging, so
Sure.
to speak. And also right around that time, the ship needed a search and rescue swimmer. A
Okay.
ship that size can't get underway without 2 search and rescue swimmers because
Hmm.
we have aircraft on board the ship.
Sure.
So I raised my hand real high
Yeah.
and vigorously, right? And I said, "Hey, I'm ready to go." So they flew me off the ship after 4 months, went back to San Diego, graduated from search and rescue swimmer school, reported back on the Boxer when it came back in August. And And then during that time, well, maybe let's say about a year later, I still had a calling. It just, wasn't enough. So
Yeah.
I said, you know what? Let me entertain this SWCC idea, right? I've been on
Yeah.
boats my whole life. Grew up right outside the Detroit area in a little small town called Harrison Township, named Boat Town, USA. I want to say it, but at the time I was growing up, it was more boats per capita than any other place
Wow. Cool.
in the nation.
Yeah. And as you know, I love boats, right? I'm a sailor. I've sailed almost my whole life. I love spending time around the water. So this is my kind of story. Keep rolling. And by the way, SWCC, that's when we said Special Warfare Combatant Craft Crewman, right? Is that what that stands for, right?
Correct.
Got it.
Correct. I started giving it some thought and I was like, this is what I'm going to do. I'm committed. I made it to reported the training Jul July 5th, I want to say
Okay.
2005,
Okay.
which
Yeah.
I'll refer to as the pipeline, the SWIFT training pipeline.
Okay. And so at this point, you're about 4 years in, right? Because 9/11 was September of
Yeah,
2001. So, right.
roughly. Yeah.
Yep.
Yep.
Okay.
Exactly.
Awesome.
So,
So tell us about the pipeline.
we first start out with BCT, basic crewman training. We're right alongside the BUDS candidate, the SEAL candidates, which go
Hmm.
to BUDS, right?
Yeah.
Coronado Island. And it was brutal. Ended up graduating in class 5-4 as the class leader and Seaman Olette award winner. And so moving forward, I reported to Special Boat Team 20. Special Boat Team 20 was actually on my radar for a long time. They had a capability of Special Boat Team 20 that the other 2 boat teams didn't have, and
Okay.
that's called MCADS, a Maritime Craft Aerial Delivery System. So essentially, we would load up one 11-meter rib in a C-130,
Okay.
bring it up to altitude, preferably about 5,000 feet, and launch it out of the back of the aircraft. We would follow it out of the back of the aircraft, skydive down to it, land into the water.
So this is a boat that gets launched out of an aircraft at
This
five
is a
thousand
boat.
feet.
This is a this is
That's
roughly a
insane.
36-foot boat.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
It goes out on a parachute or what? I mean, this sounds like a whole
Yeah.
podcast on its own, right?
There was, some three really big parachutes. Yeah, so it lands in the water, the parachutes release, we land in the water, release our chutes, and we swim to the boat. We get on the boat, which is already loaded with everything that we need it to be loaded out with for a carry-on mission or a follow-on
Wow.
mission.
Huh.
Yeah.
I didn't even know that was a thing. That's fascinating.
It was a very exciting,
I
right?
can imagine,
Excited. I
right?
was, I thought I show up at the team, I thinking I'm a made man, and boy, was I wrong.
Yeah, right.
Like,
Right.
we go through a training, a selection process like that, and you're just on top of the world until you
Right.
get to your new space, and all of a sudden, it's like, "Oh, you're not the top dog anymore. You've got a lot more training ahead of you."
Yeah, exactly. Life is like that. Every time you advance, it's like starting over again. Awesome. Cool, cool. So I mean, so this incredible. I mean, you've got this. Anything else you want to throw in there on your military career that kind of helps set up the next set of questions, which is about the book itself and the stand down framework. Anything we're missing or anything you want to make sure we fit in here?
I left after 9 years of active duty and transitioned right into the reserves.
Okay. Yeah.
And that's within 2 months, I was already downrange with the agency on my
Mhm.
first trip.
Wow.
And
Okay.
so I carried on with that with the agency for roughly 8, almost 9 years, 60 days on, 60 days off.
And the agency is the CIA now. Is that what we're talking about with the contractor side of
Correct.
things? Yeah. Okay. Awesome.
Yes. So, yeah, that went on for 8 to 9 years. And in the middle of that, I was called back up to active duty.
Really?
And for 1 year,
Huh.
went out to the Pacific with 10 guys, 10-man detached, SWCC detachment, and then came back, transitioned right back in with the agency, where I finished up in 2021.
Okay. Wow. So yeah, so just 4 or 5 years ago, you're wrapping things up with as a CIA contractor. So I knew I couldn't do justice in the intro to just this incredible career that you've had. And as I mentioned, very first time when I meet a veteran, and certainly one of your caliber. Thank you for our freedom. Thank you for your incredible service to our country. And I certainly and we at the Tech Ed Podcast don't take that lightly for a moment. So really, really grateful to you and everybody like you who puts your life on the line and goes into harm's way without thinking twice to make sure that we can continue to have the freedoms we have in the U.S. And so want to make sure that you recognize how much we appreciate that incredible service, even more than this incredible book, by the way, which is also really really good. Let's get into that now. So the book is the Stand Down Framework. Got it right here. The Stand Down Framework: Advance over Retreat. We're going to dive into that. Was there an experience in your life now that prompted you to write this book? And as I mentioned in the intro, this is like taking a really specific process that you learned in the U.S. military and putting it to work in other organizations. And I can tell you that it's effective. What prompted you to say, okay, I learned these lessons in the military. This could be really valuable for a private enterprise or for an organization that's trying to fix a problem that they've identified.
Well, first and foremost, now I'm a executive protection agent, and I was with my principal on an international trip. And by the way, the CEO is the CEO of one of the world's largest manufacturers.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah, we find ourselves in an international factory, and in one of the factories, there's a quality control issue. It's rather profound, actually. They found some issues, and but it's not me as an executive protecting agent to provide any type of consulting or be an advisor.
Yeah, all duties out as assigned, but only as assigned, right?
Yeah, exactly. So here I am watching this happen and being in the leadership realm since I was 18, like I mentioned earlier. If you're a leader, it's really hard to stand back if you have a solution. And I've always been a problem solver, Matt. It's what I love to do in life. And so when I saw this, it was really eating me up inside. So we not only saw a problem at one factory, we saw it at another.
Mhm.
And later that evening, with my principal, we end up on a walk-in, and there was just a lull and a perfect opportunity in the conversation to ask him and say, "Sir, I think I have a solution for you. It's a process that I've learned in the military. Would you like to hear about it?"
Hmm.
And he said yes.
Awesome.
And I went on about the stand down process in the military, the way that I'd known it, but not the way that I really wanted to implement it in this situation.
Okay.
So, anyways, we told him, explained it to him, presented it to him. And the next morning, he had me mentor his VP of sourcing on what I had told him. So
Okay.
from there, it was kicked off. I literally line item by line item. Where's my whiteboard? I'm a visual guy. I want to write it down. And I had known the VP of sourcing for some time already. So it was really easy to sit down and have a conversation. I,
Hmm.
I wanted to explain to him that I know I'm out of my swim lane, but I
Yeah.
was asked, right, to mentor
Right.
you on this in this process. And I'll tell you what, to make a long story short, it prompted such an amazing and profound experience process that I was told that the VP of sourcing was like, "Jay, I think you should write a book. You're very
Aw-
passionate about this."
Yeah.
And I kind of laughed and shrugged it off, like, "You've got to be kidding, right? I not only have this job, but I'm also a 100-ton licensed captain. I have a family, and there's a lot going on in my life. I really don't have time to sit down and write a book, but thanks a lot anyways." And I'm sure somebody else has already written about the process.
Okay.
Well, he looked it up right away, and he's like,
Yeah.
"Jay, no one has written anything like this before." I said, "All right, well, thanks." So on our travels back, it was kind of an ongoing joke. Well, when I arrived back in the States, I already had a family trip planned, and I've been constantly thinking about this. I can't get it off my mind, right? It was a purpose now. It kind of became my why.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and you're the kind of guy, once you get something like that in your head, right? Once you're like, I think I want to do this, it's like, you're either 100 miles an hour or standing still. So I can totally get that. Like now you're totally preoccupied with this goal of writing what ended up being a phenomenal book. So awesome.
That's the backstory of
Yeah,
the
I love that.
inspiration behind the book,
Yeah.
and it's still work. I mean, this process, it's everlasting.
Yep.
It really is. If you adhere to the book and the steps that I talk about, it's everlasting, and the manufacturer is just having great success with the program. So I just want to wrap up with this, but it's re-engineered. The stand down process is not, it was inspired by the military. All branches
Right.
of the military use it, but I re-engineered it
Okay.
for corporate America,
Awesome.
teams and leaders.
For sure. It makes total sense. And so, I think the first thing is when people think of, and when you and I first started talking about this, right? So the book wasn't done yet. We were chatting last summer, and you're like, yeah, this is. Have you ever heard of a stand down? And I'm like, well, yeah, I mean, I know what that word is. And when I think of a stand down, it's like, all right, we're going to retreat. We're going to, we're going to back off. This is anything but that in terms of the long term impact of it. So just respond to that really quickly. Is this an idea that, hey, we have this big initiative, it's not working, we're going to back off and go in a different direction, or it means something totally different, right?
It couldn't be the more polar opposite than retreating. So hence the reason on the front cover it says advance over retreat.
Hmm.
I really had to put that there because while I was designing the front cover of this book and the title,
Yep.
it really didn't dawn on me until I saw the word stand down
Hmm.
because the original title was going to be stand down.
Okay.
And then when I actually saw it for the first time, immediately I thought of retreat, and I was just fighting myself internally. Like, how am I gonna figure this out? Right?
Yep.
How am I gonna flip this around? Because I don't want to send the wrong message.
Right.
This message is anything. I want it to be anything but a retreat. This is a stand down. It's a call to action.
Yeah, absolutely. So if we and so I wanted to make sure we dispelled that with the audience right out of the blocks, is that it's advance over retreat as your subtitle on the book says, and that's exactly what it's about. Before we get into the stand down framework and the letters and so on, I want to define for the audience. You go pretty deep into this idea of drift. Can you tell our audience what the what the word drift means and what you're getting at when you talk about drift in an organization?
Sure, Matt. Drift is the slow, often unnoticed movement away from standards, clarity, discipline, and even the mission, usually without anyone making a conscious decision to allow it. It kind of looks like this: small compromises, tolerated inconsistencies, delayed conversations, lowered standards, and accepted workarounds. That, in a nutshell, is where I'm going with drift.
Yep, absolutely. And just to kind of maybe give a couple examples that occurred to me as I was going through this, and as I mentioned, and as folks know, I'm a manufacturing guy by background, so I spent a lot of time on manufacturing floors, spent a lot of time around production lines, spent a lot of time solving quality problems, understanding yield issues, responding to customers that weren't happy about one thing or another. I mean, that's the world that I lived in for the better part of a quarter century. So I get that part of it, and you start to think about, you get a little comfortable, or maybe the company's profitable, shareholders are happy, owners are happy, and you were a, 99% on time delivery company, and all of a sudden you're at like 96%, which is still pretty good, but it's not excellent. Or you had yield on a production line that was, we count rejects, believe it or not, for our audience, in the parts per million in manufacturing, right? So maybe you were at 100 parts per million, meaning that you had 100 parts out of a million products you produced that had some kind of a defect, and all of a sudden you're at 150. Or you were at world class at that time. When I was in, it was like seven, believe it or not. So you could have like 7 to 10 products out of 100 or out of a million that had a defect, and now maybe you're at 10. And so it's just a little bit of a, you're not as maniacal about holding to those standards or expectations that you were. And for, for our audience in the manufacturing space, that would be an example. On the education side, maybe our 4-year graduation rate is 99%, and then all of a sudden it's 97%. Well, 97% is still pretty good. 97% of students graduating in 4 years, that's good, but it's not 100. And so we had this drift. So, I mean, are those examples that kind of would align with what you're trying to get at here?
Absolutely aligned.
And it happens. It happens in any organization. It happens in organizations that I lead. You take your eye off the ball, you go down some other rabbit hole and get excited about something new, bright and shiny thing, and all of a sudden you look over your shoulder 6 months later, and something that was working really well maybe isn't working as well. And so now we've identified drift, and you have this whole approach to the stand down framework. Every letter stands for something, and so and there's a chapter in the book around every single one of the letters. Walk through kind of what the stand down framework is, whether it's identifying the letters or just walking through the process. And with your permission, I'll probably jump in a couple times over the course of the discussion to ask a few follow-ons. But go ahead. What is the standout framework?
So Standdown Framework, I said it before, it's an everlasting call to action system. 9 step, like you had mentioned. Every chapter is a letter of stand down.
Hmm.
This is a deliberate pause in operations, and it will give leaders an opportunity to reset, refocus, and realign so they can move forward with clarity and precision. The letters, we can start with S, signal the need. T, team alignment. A, announce the stand down. Name the anchor point. Decode the disruption. Discuss and innovate, which is my favorite.
Yeah.
And keep in mind, when writing this, it's very clear of how you should talk during these situations,
Yep.
what to say and what not to say. I'm not leaving it up to interpretation of the reader. We're at O now. So Operation Reset, work the plan, normalize, execute, and win, to sum it up.
Yeah, so let's kind of think through that. Maybe those first few letters. Let's start with that. So when we say signal the need, who does that? What does that look like? Give me an example, either for a specific example or a general one would be really helpful.
Signal a need for a stand down. I gave you the examples here early on, the signs of drift, right? You see this drift and you're like, wow, I need to reel my team, my enterprise organization, my leaders in, whatever that looks like, right?
Okay.
There's got to be something that signals the need, and it's drift. Once that's signaled, then we can move on to team alignment.
Who gets the signal that they need? Is that the leader? Is it anybody in the organization? Who's the one that stands up and says, "Hey, we're drifting. We need to fix this"?
Anybody can point out that a stand down needs to be done or
Okay.
conducted.
Yep.
However, I'm military, as you know, as I've already discussed, and we follow a very strict chain of command.
Sure.
And in corporate America, I think you do too,
Mm-hmm.
from the experience that I have. So if you're a boots on the ground factory worker kind of person
Mm-hmm.
and you see a problem, you need to voice it.
Yep.
You
Love
need to
that.
bring it up to your leadership, right? Let leadership take the reins, and hopefully they bring you in to be part of the decision-making process.
Yep. Yep. Absolutely. Your thoughts go back to it. So it's a fun story we had. I was running a manufacturing company. This was probably 20 years ago, and we had a whole idea in that company that, hey, if you see something that isn't right, if we have a production line that isn't running as well as it should be, if somebody isn't following a standard operating procedure, if you see some other issue that we were not, we're not living by our expectation of excellence, it's your obligation to stand up and say something. And I just happened to be working one night on second shift. I was working in the office, and one of the supervisors came into my office. He's like, "I'm glad you're here. Maybe maybe we can go out and and kind of see what's going on here. And we had a guy that was trying to shut an entire production line down over a quality reject. He's like, "I'm shutting this line down. Matt said I could shut." I'm like, "Well, yeah, yes, theoretically, I did say you could shut it, but maybe we just take a step back and take a look at what's actually happening here before we shut down the whole factory." The point was that he felt confident enough to be able to say, "Hey, we need to live by a standard of excellence, and if I've got an obligation to be part of a great organization, it's on me to stand up and say something." And so I think you're exactly right. You have somebody that's working in the, working the magics and the plants and factories across America and around the globe that regardless of what your position is, you have the same expectation of yourself and your team to stand up for producing excellence, which leads to that T part of it, which is team alignment. Talk about that. You talk about unity among a team and why that's so important on the front end of this. How do you go about getting that? Does everybody have to agree on everything? What does that look like?
So team alignment, here we're talking about bringing the leaders in to getting them aligned, right? Before you actually want to present the stand down to the or announce the stand down, which will be the next. So get your team bought in, make them aware of what is going on here, what excellence looks like,
Hmm.
core values, SOPs, get them all aligned. Yeah, during this time, they need to bought it. They don't need to agree
Right.
on everything, but everybody needs to be aligned. Then everybody needs to be aware.
For sure. Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the things I talk about a lot in leadership is that, a lot of times leaders push, I think, almost too hard for consensus. Like everybody has to agree that this is the way. Not everybody has to agree that the strategy is perfect. Everybody has to agree to support the strategy. And if you can't agree to support the strategy, yeah, then we have a problem. It's perfectly okay. And in fact, I can't think of any initiative that I've been involved in any organization that I wasn't leading where I felt like the leader. Of course, when I'm leading the organization, it's perfect. Just kidding. Where I felt like the leader was, was perfectly focused and perfectly executing on exactly what I thought should happen. I didn't need to, as long as we were, I call it directionally correct, as long as we're close enough and in alignment. Let's go, right? I mean, I can support somebody's strategy and somebody's direction, even if I'm not perfectly in agreement with it. But as long as we're directionally aligned, we can let it rip. Announcing the stand down. Next part, we'll jump maybe to naming the anchor points, which is a an interesting maritime connection there. I don't know if that's on purpose or not. But talk about what is that? Yeah, what is naming the anchor points? What does that mean?
So this is where we dig deep into SOPs. We dig deep into what the core values are. And I don't think it's been brought up yet, but there's a companion workbook sold separately that goes along with this book.
Awesome. We'll link it in the show
So
notes. Yeah.
sure. Yeah, the companion workbook gives you the opportunity here. If you don't know your core values, maybe you need to develop core values,
Right.
or maybe people need to explain what those core values mean to them. We can interpret things in many different ways. Obviously, so can anybody else. And what I mean by that is you and I could, but so can
Right.
anybody else, right?
Yep.
So let's get everybody aligned on what these core values are about and what this vision is. In corporations right now, visions aren't always very clear.
Agreed. Yep.
And
Agreed with you.
that's what we need to make crystal clear,
What I
is the
stole from
vision.
Patrick Lencioni, who's a writer, a leadership writer, author, and expert, is you get your vision, your mission, and your core values, and so it's the question of where are we going, is a vision. Why do we exist? What's our purpose? And then that core value side of it is what attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors, in his definition, are absolutely necessary for us to accomplish our mission and our vision. And I just love the way that kind of explanation is aligned. I know from the book that you and I agree on this. Are these just like the core values you hang in the lobby so that people are impressed that you have them when you walk in the door?
From a corporation standpoint, there are. I don't think it should stop there, right? I don't think core values should just stop with the CEO and the higher execs and VPs. Maybe your HR department needs to have their own that coincides with the corporation's core values,
Interesting.
right? Maybe you should look deep within the HR department, the execs there. Okay, maybe we have some more we want to add to this. How about manufacturing, right? Let's look deep into that and how maybe we could add another core value to that within our department, retail, so it doesn't just, the buck just doesn't stop, with the core values of, say the chairman of the
Right.
organization.
Sure, absolutely. It's got to pervade, and if certain people want to have other aspects that they tack on, and say they can't be inconsistent, obviously, with the core values of the overall organization, but certainly, augment or add to. Totally agree with that. Um, we talk about. I want to decode the disruption, which is the first D of the two Ds in stand down framework, and in the word stand down surface real problems, but you say without blame. So I think people probably get when we're trying to surface what the real problems are, the root cause, get it. But you say without blame. What does that mean, and how do you go about pointing at problems without pointing at people?
What I'm trying to explain here is we don't want to lose people at pointing fingers. We really can't accomplish goals by pointing fingers. We need
Okay,
solutions here,
sure.
right? We need solutions. So we need to look deeper than pointing fingers. Let's look at how we can fix a problem together.
Right. Got it. And agreed with that, by the way. So any wasted energy on assigning blame is looking in the rearview mirror. The real question is, where are we going as an organization? How are we going to get on top of this problem? If we can uncover root causes, and if people have responsibility for those, maybe we can change activities, we can change responsibilities, we can change procedures. But certainly spending a lot of time just casting aspersions and assigning blame for a problem doesn't really, it's not productive, and it doesn't get us any closer to a solution. What does, though, is discuss and innovate, which is the next D. And you said this is your favorite of all of the steps. So let's go a little bit deeper on that. You surfaced this problem in this organization that you were working with. You spent time with the CEO. You spent time with the VP of sourcing. You surfaced the problem. You've decoded the disruption, and now you're talking about the problem and innovation. Give us a sense for what that step of the process looks like, the decode and innovate part.
Discuss, we need to present some hard truths here. We need to be honest with ourselves. We can't overlook anything and sugarcoat anything. We need to be completely honest in the discussion piece of this. The innovation part of it all is one of my favorites because I love collaboration and team cohesion. And in the innovation part, there's all of that. There's also an opportunity to get together and create solutions. In a nutshell, without giving the book away, Matt,
Right. Yeah.
that's what discuss and innovate.
Yeah, and you talk a little bit about, you mentioned, like, you give a kind of a prescription for how to ask questions and how leaders should ask questions, and that's one of the things that really jumped out at me, Jay, as I read the book, is it's not even just so much what we ask, but how we ask it. I think is something that kind of recurs throughout the book, and maybe this is a good time for you to expound a little bit more on that part of the conversation, in terms of, how as leaders, how do we ask really good questions, and what are some good questions and maybe not so good questions?
Good questions reveal what people are thinking, not just what they know. Good questions shape thinking, they signal priorities, and determine how safe people feel ultimately. Uh, Safety is important.
Mhm.
Do you agree?
Yeah, for no question, and you want people to feel like they're safe in their role, that they can speak transparently, that they're not gonna be judged or, adversely affected in their career by speaking the truth. I mean, you can certainly say things in an organization that may be detrimental to your career, but speaking the truth and surfacing what's actually happening should never be something that you're punished for. You should feel incredibly safe in that environment.
Exactly. Well, I also, structured questions should uncover, what might be missing.
Mhm.
For an example, instead of asking how things are going,
Right?
you could ask, where is friction showing up right now? That to me is a good example of the difference in questioning and how the wording changes to pull better information out.
That's what I was going after, is like, and that's a perfect example, right? If you ask, and again, somebody that's been around organizations as long as I have, if I say to somebody, how's it going? First of all, I'd probably not interested in them sitting there and telling me every problem they're having if I'm asking that question, right? And I'm not going to get every problem they're having. But if I ask them, what are the friction points? Where are you having challenges? Where do you feel like we could be more efficient? What's your biggest headache over the course of the last week? Those are the kind of questions that team members can't avoid, right? You can't, it's impossible to give a general answer to a specific question like that. So I think how we ask those questions super important. And the other thing that kind of screamed at me through the book, and I'll tell you, I spent a long time. In fact, I was just thinking about going back to this list now in the age of AI, as organizations are trying to figure out how they need to pivot and how they need to focus on what's really important. I turned around several manufacturing companies and was involved in several other turnarounds. And when I say I was a member of a team of people that did it. I certainly wouldn't take all the credit, but leading a team of amazing people that turned around these organizations. So as a result of that, I had this whole presentation I did on the 8 steps to a financial turnaround, and walking around and helping other organizations understand how you can walk around your organization, uncover problems, and turn the business around if you're struggling financially. And one of the things that I talked about a lot is you can't speak in platitudes. You can't talk about pulling the team together. You can't talk about making things happen. Those aren't actionable calls to action on the part of a leader. You have to be specific. And you a couple times in the book, you kind of talk. You use different words, but you talk about being really specific and not kind of speaking in platitudes. Talk to that a little bit and why that's so important.
Being direct, we're not trying to beat around the bush. We're not trying to sugarcoat anything.
Right.
We don't want to hide the truth and honesty.
Hmm.
We don't. We want people to be upfront. We want to share ideas that are meaningful. We want to be constructive as possible. We want to communicate, and to not do that, like we mentioned earlier, is just counterproductive.
Right. Absolutely. So being really specific in terms of how we message to team members, what we're trying to do, and not just speaking in generalities, certainly important. And that's the kind of speech, I think, and the kind of message from a leader that inspires action and lets people know that we're serious about where we're trying to go. Now that we've discussed and innovate, we do our operational reset. So we're, individuals know what they're responsible for in the process coming out of the stand down. And the next step is working the plan. And one of the things that you talk about is execute with discipline and adjust with intelligence. And I think that, that first part about, executing with discipline, folks that have run organizations, been part of successful projects, probably get that part of it. The aspect of adjusting with intelligence, talk about that. We identified the problem, we've aligned the team, we've announced our stand down, we decode the disruption, discuss and innovate, reset the operation, and now we're talking about working the plan. Is that plan rigid, or is that something that needs to be flexible, and why?
So these are my thoughts on rigidity. Our environment is constantly changing. Whether that means we have change of talent coming in out of the workspace, technological changes. I think to make this so rigid just would be counterproductive. If you want to implement a change anywhere, say after tasking has been implemented, it needs to be spelled out by leadership. People need to be bought in on it, and it just needs to be communicated overall, right? I'm not saying that all of it needs to be rigid, but we need to identify and be a little flexible in things as the environment changes.
Absolutely. And I think that's important for people to recognize is that we can come up with an action plan, but that action plan is, it's not set in stone. And there's all kinds of these different aspects of executing on a plan that are out of our control, things that we don't anticipate, things that we don't know that are going to happen that can happen. In other words, maybe we think that we've got a perfect solution to a manufacturing problem, but then we find that there's a supply chain issue that we can't get the parts that we need in order to solve that problem. Or maybe we thought we had gotten after the root cause and solved it, and we get a month into it and it's like, well, we're 90% of the way there, but this part of it isn't working. We can't just stick so rigidly to that plan that we don't adjust a little bit to what's left to be done. So I think that part of it was another thing that jumped out. And then we get to the end and talk a little bit about the normalizing stage of the project and of the stand down, and then how we build that into culture and how we don't lose sight of that just because the project might be working its way to its own end.
So in normalization, right? This is the new.
Yep.
We want it to be everlasting. One of the biggest things is we need to task individuals with things. and we need to hold them accountable. And accountability comes through maybe a matrix.
Yep.
And I'll talk about a matrix, right? Let's hang a matrix on the wall. Let's have your peers look at that, hold you accountable on top of your leaders. I think peers are an incredible resource to holding people accountable. I
No
mean,
doubt.
I know that works for me. I don't want to let my peers down, right?
Yeah. You don't want to be the one that on the team that lets someone else down. Yeah, for sure.
That's correct. And we need to revisit this matrix. I like to start off on a weekly basis. Let's revisit this. Let's talk through it as a team. Let's praise those that are doing a good job, right? I'm a big proponent in praising in public. I think
Yep,
it's
for sure.
very important to do that, right? So let's praise them and let's just keep moving forward incrementally. Let's start slow. We always say crawl, walk, run in the soft community, right? Let's start a baby step, so to speak. So crawl, walk, run. Let's crawl through this first. Let's meet up every week and go over the matrix. See if there's any shortfalls. See if people have questions. Maybe they're highlighting some things that need attention immediately. So we'll go through a weekly process, and then as we grow and we want to keep this consistent and we want to make this everlasting, we go to a biweekly system, right? Uh, and we just keep progressing.
Got it. And so we're building that into the culture.
We're building it into the culture. We're not leaving anything behind. We have to revisit things.
Absolutely, constantly, and that's with any continuous improvement project. That's where the ones that I've seen kind of fall apart a little bit is when we talk about 5S. The fifth S is sustain, right? So we have to find a way to sustain that change in the organization. Unless we build that into the culture, build that into the project, that makes it really, really difficult for us to do that. So what I want to do now is just talk a little bit. We've kind of walked through the stand down framework, what the letters stand for. Jay, you've got some really cool, and they just they stream at you through the book philosophies and adages on leadership. And I just want to a little bit, not rapid fire, but maybe just kind of crank through a few of these that just screamed out at me and let you expound on them just a little bit. Let's start with this one. There's a theme in the book that says every organization has untapped intelligence in its ranks. So talk about that. What do you mean by that? And maybe how do we uncover some of that intelligence that we're not tapping into in our organizations?
I think the intelligence, where I was going with that is boots on the ground, right? The
Mm.
factory workers, a lot of these factory workers, they could have degrees, 4-year
For
bachelor
sure.
degrees right now,
You bet.
right?
Yeah,
And these guys and girls, they know what is going on the front lines. They know more than executive level, I
for sure.
believe.
Yep.
So why not use them? Why not tap them for information, right? I'll give you an example of, the education piece. So when I went through the SWIC pipeline, we don't have officers in the SWIC ranks. Other than
Okay.
warrant officers, we don't have officers in the SWIC ranks. So you could come in the Navy with a 4-year degree and not be an officer and be enlisted and go through the selection process, go to a team and move forward. When I went through that wasn't very likely. It wasn't likely in 2005, 2006 that guys were coming in with bachelor's degrees, because if they were coming in with bachelor's degrees, then they'd be an officer. But as the officer ranks started filling up, they weren't taking many officers anymore later on. Now this over the period of 10 years or so. So now that I graduated and I've got 6, 7 years beneath my belt, now it's time for my peers that I graduated with to go to the schoolhouse to be instructors.
Okay.
So they go to the schoolhouse and they're instructors, and I end up going to the schoolhouse and meeting some of them. It was great to see some old faces and shake
Yeah.
hands and
Sure.
throw hugs and whatever else, right? So I said, "Well, what's the biggest difference you're seeing now at the schoolhouse with your students?" He said, "Jay, the biggest difference we're seeing is a lot more coming in with 4-year degrees." He goes, "Do you remember those days that we were being taught mission planning and had to use a PowerPoint presentation and had no idea how to use it?
Yeah.
And that was in not being able to perfect that on a PowerPoint presentation during your mission planning, you were getting remediated. And what I mean by that, it's, hey, you're going to go get wet and sandy,
Hmm.
right?
Wow. Yeah.
So fast forward, what I'm talking about here is these new instructors are identifying the students now have 4-year degrees. They can kill a PowerPoint presentation,
Right. Yeah.
kill it, right?
Yeah.
They have that background. They have to find different ways to remediate these students because it does teach discipline, right? And it does make you stronger and more
Absolutely.
resilient to be,
Yep.
to go through these remediations. However,
Yeah.
they had to be very creative. They had to get very creative because of now these 4-year degrees are just everywhere and they're killing it.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
when I bring that up because I had mentioned you never know. Your boots on the ground could have this profound education you don't even know about until you reach out to them.
For sure. Yeah. There's a reason why, when I would do a continuous improvement or a Kaizen event in a manufacturing operation, we would include people from all different aspects and all different walks of life in that business because they would see different things and there was incredible untapped intelligence. So I think that's a really, really good example of making sure as leaders that we're looking for certainly intelligence where we expect to find it, but be even more important, some of those capabilities, intelligence, and abilities where we least expect to find it. And I guarantee you from experience that if you go looking for it in the, in the, like I say, the factories and the plants across America, you're going to find a tremendous amount, a whole wealth of knowledge and understanding. Here's another one. You talk about this idea that innovation doesn't start with problems, it starts with possibilities. So what do you mean by that one?
When leaders only ask what went wrong, they protect today. But when leaders ask, what is now possible, they shape tomorrow. So look beyond what is wrong
Hmm.
and start imagining what could exist that does not currently exist.
Absolutely. So if we're looking at a problem in a manufacturing plant, for example, we can stare at that problem all day long and we can attack the problem, or we could ask the what if questions and kind of open up our mind to something that could be even bigger. Is that what you're getting at there?
Yeah, it's not always about what is broken. It's about what we can create. When we start creating, we start looking at new possibilities.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. So here's another one. I've got this adage and I stole it from somewhere 25, 30 years ago. And the whole idea is whatever happens, take responsibility. And that's been like my mantra when I'm leading an organization. It doesn't matter if it's my fault, if it's a condition that happened outside of my realm of responsibility, if it's something that happened inside of the organization that I didn't necessarily cause, that I don't quote think is my fault. I've always believed that as the leader of the organization, you take responsibility for whatever happens. And when that's the case, it totally shifts your mindset, and it probably related to the last question, from I need to cover for myself or find a scapegoat or an excuse for why this went wrong, to it doesn't really matter why it went wrong. I'm responsible. I now need to find the solution. And it happens in an instant. If you follow that adage, whatever happens, take responsibility. That seems to be a common theme in your book as well. Agree or disagree, and why?
I absolutely agree. You say responsibility, I call it accountability. Culture is shaped by what leaders model. Accountability just it creates trust, stability, and credibility. As leaders, we would never ask anything of anyone that we haven't or aren't willing to do ourselves. Is the
Exactly.
way I look at it, and that sets the tone.
I think a lot of times people that are new to leadership, they feel like being accountable to the team or being vulnerable, some people might say, like admitting like, hey, I screwed this up, or I think I know what to do here, but I'm not positive. And a lot of times people would say, well, that's a sign of weakness as a leader. But if you're accountable for whatever happens, if you're, take responsibility, in my words, if you, and if you're open with your team members and have that vulnerability, you're a better leader, right? I mean, that's why Jim Collins calls that a level 5 leader. If you've got that, if you got so much confidence in yourself and your ability that you're willing to be open to criticism and redirection, and that's a really, really valuable character trait to have as a leader. There's no doubt about that. All right, a couple more leadership questions, and then we'll get to the final two questions we ask every single guest here on the Tech Ed podcast. Jay, um, You talked a moment ago about, how important it is to publicly recognize and praise was the word you used, people when they're performing at a high level and meeting expectations or exceeding expectations. Not your words, but mine. Talk about how we do that. So, you talk about recognizing the team members exhibiting the right behaviors and especially when they're particular to the book, executing the plan from the stand down. What's the best way to praise somebody? Give us an example of that.
Well, first of all, we always praise in public, right?
Hmm.
Uh, while we're praising in public, we always explain what they did,
Sure.
why it mattered, and what standard it reflected,
Yep.
right? I think
Yep.
that's very important to point out the standard that they actually used to move through this process to be successful.
Perfect. Yeah, I love that. So I love that way of looking at it and doing it publicly. There's just nothing that feels better than being praised in front of your peers. To your earlier point, you want to feel like you never want to feel like you let your peers down. And having a leader highlight something that you did in front of your contemporaries, in front of your coworkers, in front of your peers, super super valuable element of leadership. Another element of leadership is in terms of how we think about the value of people in our organization. There's a sentence in the book, and I wrote it down, and I'm going to use it over and over and over again. I haven't heard it put this way before, and I think it's brilliant. I think I mentioned it in the intro. In the Normalize, Execute, and Win chapter, you have a question: are we developing our people, or are we just extracting value from them? What's the difference between those two things?
Extracting value focuses on what someone can produce for you today. Developing people focuses on what they can become for the organization tomorrow. We're
Awesome.
always trying to be forward thinking, right? That I firmly agree and believe that we always have to be forward thinking. And I really believe that this system does just that. It assists the reader into being forward thinking.
Yep, love it. And I think, what resonated to me out of that sentence is there's a lot of companies, and I can tell you, I've worked around a lot of leaders over the years and seen a lot of leaders that look at somebody in the organization as just somebody that can generate margin for the business, right? If I can pay this person X, I can generate Y
True.
amount of margin. As long as Y is greater than X, I'm making making money on that person. And there's a lot of organizations that look at it that way. And it doesn't necessarily mean that that's a bad employment relationship for the person that's in that position. But think about that versus developing that person for the future. And there's two wins in that, or maybe
Yes.
multiple. But number one is the organization's going to win because you're going to have an individual that's capable of adding even more value. So even if your only focus is economic, which it shouldn't be, that Y number is going to get bigger. X should get bigger too. In other words, you should be able to pay that person more money, but the margin you can generate on their work would grow. But on the other hand, you're investing in that person for them. And so you're developing that other human being so that they can, hopefully in your organization, maybe somewhere else in a way that doesn't hurt you, can go out and add value for themselves, their family, and so on. And that's at least for me why that sentence resonated so well with me. One more question on leadership. And there were so many parallels between things that I use in our businesses and adages that I've had over the years and things that are in the book. One of the things that I talk about all the time is the first sign of a dysfunctional management team is one that cancels its own meetings. So speak to that. I mean, why should we be so careful about canceling meetings and what makes a great meeting?
I'll start with this. Know why the meeting exists in the
Hmm.
first place, right? Well, what are we trying to accomplish? Is this a meeting where we're trying to decide something? Are we trying to solve something? Or maybe even do we need to be more in line? So this is a meeting about aligning and even informational. Maybe it's a meeting about that, but you have to know why you're having the meeting is paramount. So, start with an issue that matters most
Hmm.
is one of my rules, right? Just start with that, get it out there. Keep the room focused on contribution, not attendance.
Okay. Yep. I like that.
It's not about who is present all the time, it's about who adds value. Ask precise questions, it's what risk are we overlooking?
Hmm.
Is the first that comes to mind. And then end with ownership. Ownership is a common theme throughout the book. Every meeting should leave with who owns what, by when, and what success looks like.
Yep. Absolutely. I love it. I mean,
right?
I'm a big, yeah, big Microsoft Excel guy to a fault, but it's like if we're having a meeting and we're setting up a project, it's like, okay, what are we doing? Who's responsible for it? When is it going to be done? And then what's the status? And it's just that cadence of trying to stay focused on action items and focused on outcomes and focused on ownership. And I agree 100%. Two more questions for you, Jay. They're questions that we ask every single guest here on the Tech Ed podcast. Excited to hear your answers to them. We all have our journey through education, right? So, and I know you had yours. As you kind of reflect on your education journey and think about something that might surprise our audience a little bit. What's a view you have on education, formal or informal, that's a little bit interesting or might surprise folks a little bit?
I just like to touch on mentorship,
Yeah,
right?
go for it. Yeah.
Think through the education process nowadays, there isn't much mentorship.
Hmm.
If I read this correctly, an elementary school on average has about 19 students per class.
Sure.
Middle school has about 17 to 22 students per class. And this is all dependent on, whether this is a populated urban area, suburban area, because these numbers could go higher than this, and of
For
course
sure.
go lower, but this is an average. And a high school is about 21 to 22 students per class times five times six, depending on
Yeah.
how the school's structured.
Sure.
How can educators actually get out and mentor these students?
Hmm.
I think mentorship is key.
Yeah.
If it wasn't for sound and key mentorship, this book wouldn't even have surfaced. There wouldn't
Absolutely.
even have been a thought. But because of the mentorship that I've had, this came to fruition.
Yep.
Just think of that on a lower level for kids that are so impressionable at such young ages.
Hmm.
We're living in a world that's so fast right now.
For sure we are. It's crazy.
There's very little room to be average in
Right.
our world. You sink or you swim. I'm sure you growing up, myself growing up, we could make mistakes.
I
We
did
could be set
plenty of
back
them.
a year.
Right.
I did.
Yeah.
I was set back a year, 2 years, 3 years. I don't think I'd want to be set back a year, 2 or 3 years nowadays.
Right. Yeah. You miss too
Right.
much. Right. Yeah.
Yeah, right. And I think through the right leader or mentorship, maybe those 1 or 2, 3 years could be mitigated in some of these young kids' lives.
Great point. We do have time for one more question for Jay Richards, and that is this one. We're going to go back in time. We're going to go back to your sophomore year of high school, 15-year-old Jay Richards. At this point, who knows? Obviously nobody knew 9/11 was coming. Maybe you were inspired by that point to do something like being a firefighter or military service or what have you, but none of us knows our past. So go back to before all of that crazy, I shouldn't say crazy, but incredibly valuable special operations leadership and serving in our military and protecting our freedom and all these things that you've done, writing this book. If you could give that 15-year-old Jay Richards one piece of advice, what would that be?
Wow. First thing that comes to mind would be to be more inquisitive,
Okay.
ask more questions. I touched on it in the previous question. Seek mentorship early.
Yep.
I made plenty of mistakes, and most of them happened when I was 15. So it's funny you
Yeah,
brought
right.
up
Exactly.
your old self. That's when it all went.
That was a tough year for me too. Absolutely. Looking back on it, there's
Yeah,
no doubt.
I would say 15. Those were pretty tough years for me.
Right.
But
We could do a podcast on that too, but we're not going to.
yeah, yeah, you're right, and it'd be a couple hours,
Right.
I'm sure.
Exactly.
Right.
Right. And I'd lose several jobs afterwards. So we're just going to keep that up.
Sure. Yeah.
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 Yes. Straight.
Yeah. Right. I still need to be in the workforce, man. So
Yeah. Exactly. You and me
we'll,
both. Awesome.
we'll that idea.
Yeah.
But
For
yeah, be
sure.
more inquisitive, ask more questions. I think I was such a social butterfly at 15 and into sports, and that was more important to me. But if I had to go back, I definitely ask more questions and be more
Absolutely.
inquisitive.
Love it. Yeah. Ask more questions, be more inquisitive. We asked a ton of questions on this episode of the Tech Ed podcast. And really, I mean, I knew our audience was going to love you. By now they do. Just an incredible service to our country, incredibly intelligent, brilliant person on so many different topics, but certainly leadership and how we can improve our process and improve our organizations, whether it's a manufacturing organization, an educational institution, or really any organization using the stand down framework. So Jay, so awesome to have you on. It's been an honor to get to know you. Looking forward to the future, but just so grateful for that you wrote this book and that you spent some time with us here on the Tech Ed podcast.
Thank you, Matt. I appreciate the opportunity. I truly do.
It was an opportunity for me as well, and for our audience. Just a great episode here of the Tech Ed podcast with J.C. Richards, retired U.S. Navy SWCC, and talking about all of that, the things that he did in special operations, the things that he did as a CIA contractor. I know that we scratched the surface. We probably got like one out of, like 1% of 1% of everything that he could possibly tell us, but just an incredible background. So Jay, so awesome to have you here, and it's specific to this episode of the Tech Ed podcast, the Standdown Framework, his book. We're going to link that up in the show notes for you, along with the workbook that goes alongside it. I'm sure folks are going to want to check that out, and I can tell you, having read it, you definitely want to check it out. So that was terrific. We're going to put the show notes at techedpodcast.com/Richards. That is techedpodcast.com/RICHARDS. When you're done on the show notes, of course, check out our social media channels. We're on every single one of them. The YouTube channel continues to go absolutely crazy. Check us out there now in video form, as people have certainly figured out over the course of time. You can also find us on Instagram. You can find us on Facebook. You can find us on TikTok. You can find us just about anywhere you go to look, LinkedIn, anywhere you go to look for your social media, you will find the Tech Ed podcast. And of course, when you're there, reach out, say hello. We can't wait to hear from you. And we will see everybody next week on the Tech Ed podcast. Until then, I am your host, Matt Kirkner. Thank you so much for being with us.